we talked about this Joe Rogan, Matt Walsh interview that took place about a week ago exactly today. And one of the things that came out of it was that Matt Walsh, the supposed expert on all things trans, he has done a documentary about it. He has, I think, many times said that he has dedicated his life to it. He was one of the amplifiers, if not one of the catalysts, for various children's hospitals around the country having to go on lockdown because people there were doxxed or they got bomb threats because they were providing gender-affirming care for kids under the age of 18. And Matt Walsh will not stand for that. And so this expert, cited how many kids were on puberty blockers or getting any type of hormone treatment. He said it was in the millions. And then Joe Rogan's crack team of fact checkers said, no, actually, no, it's not even in the, it's not even the five figures. It's in the thousands.
Over a multi-year
stretch. In a single year, it was in the hundreds.
Yes. Yeah. And so Matt Walsh, so-called expert, has absolutely no idea about what he's talking about. The fundamental question outside of the morality of it, because he gets to impose his morality on other people. That's the way it works in his world. But what we didn't bring you was the rest of the conversation, which was just as ill-informed, but also a little bit more, I guess, disgusting. Here is Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh discussing how there are different kinds of trans people, according to the expert Matt Walsh. And we should say, this is moments before he gets fact-checked on. So he didn't even know, within a factor of, I don't know, 1,000? Is it a factor of 1,000 or more?
Yeah, it's the order of magnitude of 2, I think, is what I'm not a math guy,
I don't know.
It's to go from millions to hundreds per year is wild.
And then he was like, well, hundreds of thousands probably.
But to be clear, that's just like the stuff that you could learn with the basic research. But now he's an expert on the different types of trans people.
Classification.
So in general, there are different categories of people who transition. And we kind of talk about them like they're all the same, but they're not. And you can kind of break it down by age. There's the very young children, a 5-year-old.
All right, pause it. Let me just say this. This is, incidentally, this is completely made up.
Yeah.
There is not a shred of, I don't even think academics who are, you're not going to find, there are different types of trans people. And the way we break it down is by age. What?
Yeah, no, this is the crudest form of 19th century race science. Basically there's the sun people and there's the ice people, and the ice people, they have bigger brains because their sun's not baking them all the time.
It's not even that sophisticated, actually. It's just number small, number big, difference. But what he's going on to say is also just there's no basis of his articulating this whatsoever. But I'll stop it in just a moment. I know it's going to be annoying, but
down by age. There's the very young children, a 5-year-old, and we hear that, oh, my 5-year-old is trans. That's 1,000% the parent just deciding they're going to do that to the child, because no child even knows what that is.
Pause it.
You have to.
Absolutely. That is absolutely 100% not the case. Now, how do I know it's 100% not the case? Because it's 1,000% all the parent. I know. I have firsthand knowledge of a 5-year-old who approached his mother and said, "Mommy, I'm sorry. I want to be a girl." The mother had never broached the issue of trans with this child, never had cause to, and was shocked, did not believe that first, and the kid was apologetic. This is a guy who has no, I assume he has children. He probably doesn't deal with them that much. But based upon what his limited knowledge of children. But the kid came up completely on his own. And eventually, because he was getting so upset about it, the mother, said, okay, and, let him dress I would say somewhere between androgynous and like a girl. He identified as a girl. I spent some time with this child at one point and accidentally said like, yeah, like a big boy. And he looked at me and I meant like a big girl. And then a couple years later, just decided, you know what? I'm comfortable being a boy. Like the idea that this doesn't, the idea that it's a spectrum, that there's a continuum, and that this is all imposed by parents is just absurd.
Well,
we have many cases of this, like of conservative, like arch conservatives coming out. We
had a Fox News story.
Yeah.
Brian Lanas posted it, and Dana Perino introduced the segment. California transgender teen family hope to be an inspiration to others, and it was this kid coming to the conservative parents with their gender issue.
We played that.
Exactly, we did. And Matt Walsh's response was, "I've appeared on Fox News many times. I appreciate the platform they've given me. If what I'm about to say ruins that relationship, so be it. We have to call this evil lunacy out wherever we see it." But we know why he's so sensitive to that is because it proves him to be a liar.
A liar.
And
Totally
also, I just gotta say, they said the same crap about gay kids, that it was being imposed on them, that it was their parents brainwashing them, and what do you know? Of course, it wasn't the case.
Just deciding they're going to do that to the child, because no child even knows what that is. So you have to suggest that to them. Then you have the adolescent girls, and Abigail Schreier's written about this in her great book. And that's the social contagion. They pick it up from society.
Yeah,
but then there's the
social
older
contagion.
men who are adults and decide one day that they're women. And for so many of them, this is a fetish. I mean, this is like the thing we're not allowed to say or acknowledge, but it's totally true. That for most of these older men who decide that I'm a woman, it's a fetish. It's autogynephilia. They're enchanted by the idea of themselves as women. And so now we have to participate in your fetish. Like you get off on the idea of being seen as a woman, and I have to be a participant in that. It's really degrading and to all of us.
All right, now pause it right here. First off, he's making this up. He's making this up that it's a fetish. It's literally it is made up fairy tale time. But let's just even stipulate that it is, just for the sake of his dumbass argument. I can call him an auto idiot. How's that? And is that a clinical term?
You sound very smart.
Thank you. I used the word auto in front of this. Guess what? There's a lot of fetishes out there. And the fact that they exist does not compel me to be part of their fetish. Like, even that this guy, even as sort of like fascistic and theocratic as Matt Walsh is, well, I guess because it's a theocracy, that like he wants to compel me to be part of it. But even as that is, like, I don't spend that much time thinking about Matt Walsh. The idea that there may be people out there with a fetish, and like I say, it's not a fetish, but even if it was, you're not compelled to participate in it. It's absurd.
Well, you're rubbing it in my face, so
It's
you have to.
absurd.
And that's the thing about it, right? Is like Matt Walsh is such a theocrat that he sees any acknowledgement of gender as a construct or of a difference in identity as being somewhat shameful. And why are you rubbing our faces in your fetish, right? This is all stuff that I keep really buried deep down, and it needs to be private. And that's what makes them all uncomfortable about an open exploration of sexuality and gender in like a public forum.
Let me espouse some fake science in the same way that Matt Walsh would. A huge percentage of people who sport a beard are sporting a beard.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's
you follow me? Like,
you're rubbing their faces in it.
but it's not just that they're actually wearing a beard, but it's functioning as a beard.
It's called auto-pseudo-masculinism. It's really...
Your outward expression of so much facial hair makes me feel like, I don't know, what's your thing with hair?
No, it's something that maybe covered it up. I don't know if you're familiar with the term beard, but everything he was saying about like it's degrading to force us to be part of their fetish. I can tell you that when there became a modicum of acceptance of gay people in this country, the next sort of like retreat that homophobic bigots would make is like, look, if they want to do this in their own bedroom, that's one thing. But to subject me as I walk down the street to seeing two guys holding their hands together, that is not right. That's exactly
You're
what
rubbing
he's
my
doing.
face in it.
And here's Joe Rogan to go like, oh, wait a second. You're bringing up old tropes that we brought up about gay people? Hold my beer. Hold my vitamin,
Hold my brain force.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Alex Jones.
Yeah, hold
my alpha force.
my hormone, my whatever it is.
Hold my tea.
My steroid drink.
That we're all being forced into this.
Well, it's always been a psychological condition. It's always been known as being like a psychiatric condition. Like it's a mental health issue.
Right.
And now it's being accepted as a gender identity issue.
Pause it.
Where it was,
This is exactly, almost word for word, except for the word identity and gender, when it was like a sexual desire. Every other word that he said there was exactly what his ilk were saying about gay people 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, word for word. In fact, when was it that that it got off? There was an official diagnosis
DSM.
but
Yes,
on the DSM,
DSM.
up until probably like the 80s or the 90s, I would imagine. It was literally the same thing. Society had determined that this is a psychological problem, disease, that we're now being forced to accept as just being normal. This is what Joe Rogan would have been saying if Joe Rogan was around. I don't know who he was, Morton Downey at that time or whoever it was.
It's declassified in the 70s post Stonewall riots.
Okay, so in the 70s. Same thing they were saying. Same thing. By the 80s, they're saying like this used to be a psychological disorder. Now we have to just accept the fact that two guys are going to hold hands in the public together.
Yeah, I would still hear that DSM thing sort of cited, even though it was
I
20
think-
years out of date.
I think it was still like a part of like they downgraded its classification, but it might not have been fully. We need to look more into it, but it might have not been fully stripped out until fairly recently. But we can keep going.
Go ahead.
was always just like a weird kink that people had. And now you're again, regardless of whether or not this person's a sex offender, registered sex offender,
What?
repeated sex offender, you have to accept this. Otherwise, you're a bigot. It's just this rigid adherence to ideology is so cult-like. It's so fucking Handmaid's Tale. It's so wild that people are just wholesale adopting this.
This is somebody
And this
looking
is
in the
not to
mirror.
deny that there's people that are trans. I've met people that are trans. It exists in nature. I mean, you occasionally, guys will shoot a buck and they'll find out that it's actually a female with antlers. Nature's weird, right? I think nature does put people, make humans for whatever reason that really feel like they should have been born a female or should have been born a male. But that's not all of what's happening. And in our desire to be compassionate and to have care for these people and to love these people and respect these people, we're opening the door to all this chaos.
Okay, pause it. I mean, this is honestly, first off, in addition to the fact that he just completely undercut everything he was saying, but adding, like this is natural, except for there's something else going on here. Notice that the only thing that is going on here is that over the past 10 or 15 years, when there has been wider acceptance for trans people, where they are no longer sort of like de facto articles of ridicule at best, threatened with their lives at worst. Remember, we played that, it was going around for a while. Jon Stewart in 2004 was mocking the idea of a trans person sitting on the Supreme Court. Justice Tranny. I mean, this is Jon Stewart 15 years ago. Okay, to give you a sense of what has happened in society. The idea that when society stops being vehemently hostile, writ large, there's still obviously people who are still vehemently hostile, but writ large stops being vehemently hostile, there won't be people who in past years were terrified of expressing who they are, that suddenly they are, and we get a bump in the number of people who identify that way. The idea that this is hard to understand, something else is going on. That's what's going on. That's what's going on. And that's why you got people like the guy sitting across from Joe Rogan making money on the backlash from this. That's what's going on. Rogan admits that this is a natural thing that exists in nature. But then he's like pretending there's some other mechanism that's going on here. Like there's some secret body of people who are pushing not the gay agenda, because that's 20 years old. That's you haven't heard that in 20 years or 15 years.
And by the way, removed in 2013. Homosexuality removed entirely in 2013. So it was under Obama.
They were talking about the gay agenda, and that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's talking about the trans agenda now, right? Which, of course, is also just as made up. To the extent that trans people or their allies have an agenda, it is, just let them live. Allow them to get health care. That's the agenda, not chaos. Because I got news for you. The other thing that if you were, Joe Rogan's age, you knew during 2004, 2005, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, the idea that if gay people get married, it's over. It's chaos. Literally, cats and dogs raining down. And these guys are just exactly to a T. And Rogan's just too much of an idiot to realize it.
This is just conservatism. This idea that you can't trust people with the liberation ongoing, even though it might be good, but they need to slow it down to a pace where me and Jordan Peterson are comfortable with
exactly. And Jordan Peterson's still complaining about the fact that, like, there's a plus size woman on my Sports Illustrated. I can't whack off to that. It's being shoved down our throats of the new version of what constitutes beauty.
Yeah.
Rogan's just too much of an idiot to understand that he's sitting across the aisle from a theocrat, sitting across the table from a theocrat. I mean, maybe Rogan's also sort of getting off on it and being transgressive or whatever it is, but he thinks he's being sort of reasonable and thoughtful about it, and he's not. He's not at all. And he is just exactly regurgitating every single homophobic trope that existed when he was growing up. I know when he was growing up. Every single one that he heard, as a 25-year-old in Boston. Every single one. And he's just spitting it out now with trans. It's it. It's the exact same thing. Just let it finish.
The door to all this chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you highlight so well in this film.
Nerd.
Yeah, so much chaos that the Republican Party ran on it and had a historical failure. They ran on this. In Michigan, Emma brought up. They spent more on this ads than anything else. Anything else. And here he is, Matt Walsh, just assuming, like, here it is. This is, he tweeted this out. This idiot. This guy's so stupid.
3 p.m. on election.
So excited. 3 I'm sorry, folks, we had a little bit of internet breakdown, but the bottom line is that this guy is so deluded. In addition to his delusions about trans people in general, he's also deluded on election day as to who's going to win. Put back up his Pollsters may not be asking about it, but there's no doubt the Democrat Party was partly doomed by its decision to go all in on gender ideology. We successfully made this a losing political issue for them. The bottom line is, like, the Democrat Party did nothing in terms of gender ideology. This is just a way that he thinks that, like, liberal society is somehow accepting trans people more, which I think is marginally correct. I guess to the extent that, the Democrat Party went all in on gender ideology. Biden appointed a trans woman to what was it? To
She's an
Surgeon
HHS
General
official.
or something.
She's a Health and Human Services.
Health and Human
And he
Services.
had a trans TikTok influencer come to the White House.
Yeah. The
So-
bottom line is, and then they end up losing in a historical fashion across the board, but in a place like Michigan where they went all in, the Republicans, on their anti-trans stuff, they got wiped out because people just don't have a problem with trans people like Matt Walsh begged them to. B, people don't think about it like Matt Walsh does. People are not obsessed about it. Just because this guy is making his name within transphobic, bigoted conservative circles, the only way he gets on Joe Rogan is by basically demonizing trans people.
It's a guy who lied and said he was renting in Loudoun County so he can go speak at a school board message.
Yeah,
They're like,
he's
that's
just
not
a
something
guy.
normal people. That's weird, bro.
This guy's so twisted.
But also,
He's dumb.
when you interacted with Walsh on Twitter and basically were like, "Yeah, sorry, I'll amend my tweet. Like, sorry, your anti-trans bullshit only worked in Florida." That's the point. It worked in one state.
Well, to the extent you can credit Florida with that.
And even like Florida obviously had seemingly the best night of all in terms of like Republicans winning and gaining ground. Across states, Pennsylvania state legislature might flip. The Michigan state legislature for the first time in almost 30 years. The Minnesota state legislature flipped. Like, none of this actually held any salience to help places where it was really actively perpetuated in campaigning.
And let's be clear. I mean, Florida has increasingly turned red over the years, and not because of trans ideology.
That might just be more demographic than anything else.
And no,
not
it's
in
also a
terms of
complete
the
absence
platform.
of the Democratic Party actually giving a shit about Florida.
Yeah, they
I mean,
ran
they're running
Republicans.
Charlie Crist and Val Demings like, I'm a cop, I fund the police, and yeah, they lost, in historic fashion.
Nevada
basically.
enshrined it into their constitution, equality, including gender equality.
Yep. We talked about that the other day. So, F Matt Walsh and F Spotify for platforming this stuff and making millions of dollars off of full-on 100% completely evidence-free, data-free transphobia. Period. End of story. That is Spotify's business model. There is no one on their network who is paid more money than that guy who is using his platform as a way of spreading transphobia. Period. End of story. There's just simply no debate about that. None. And frankly, like, people are worried that, like, we're selling the same knives that Matt Walsh is selling. Anybody who goes on that show and doesn't say this stuff to Joe Rogan's face is doing a disservice. I'm not saying you shouldn't go on that show, but if you don't leave that studio with them pissed at you, you've done something wrong.
Well, that's probably why they're curating their guest list a bit.
Yeah, certainly, like, at one point made the turn, but there you go. NBBB, the fact that even paraphilias like transvestic fetishism continue to exist in the DSM is bigoted and destructive.
Yeah, gender dysphoria is still in the,
There was a case in Canada of a cis man who dressed in women's clothing for his own pleasure, and after his wife found out, she divorced him and used his behavior as a weapon in a subsequent custody battle. He was considered a danger to his children. He was only allowed to see his kids if he committed to a regimen of Depo-Provera to kill his sex drive. All of this is good old-fashioned misogyny.